Hello, this is Patrick Ash, and welcome to presentation number 4 in our series today. This session is all about swim, bike, run. What are the specific things you need to know as a triathlete? And this is geared more towards the newer triathlete or someone who maybe has limited experience. But even if you're an experienced triathlete, you're still going to find some value and some interesting things to focus on in your sessions. What we'll cover in this series. So just as a quick overview, we talked about in our previous presentations, you can always go back and look at those through the SAS Triathlon website. But what it takes was our first one, talking about just some of the expectations and things you need to know as a triathlete to make sure that you have your best experience possible. And then in December, we talked about goal setting, so how to set up your season for success and set up your training framework and your mindset. And then in January, we talked about how to train, so how to set up your schedule in order to meet your goals and your expectations. And today we're going to talk about swim, bike, run, specifically all the things that are important for you to know. Then in March, we'll talk about health versus fitness, making sure that how you're approaching your training aligns your health and fitness together. And then nutrition for training and events will happen in April as we lead into the season. And then event day planning will be our last session in May as we get into the season. All right, so today we're going to cover 4 things in this session. The first thing we'll talk about is understanding forces. And really, as an athlete, the simplest thing to think about it is triathlon is you versus the external forces you're going against. And we'll talk about what those specific forces are and how you can best overcome them with what you do and also with the gear that you choose. The second thing we'll talk about is technique and gear as it relates to swimming faster. The third thing we'll talk about is bike essentials, effort, technique, and gear and how those line up. And then lastly, we'll talk about faster run. So some tips and some gear around running that will help you become a better, more efficient, and faster runner. All right, let's get into it. So this is not rocket science. The sport of triathlon, even though it's complex and you're combining 3 different sports together, it's not complex. The easiest way to look at it is like I talked about a second ago. Our body is what we're trying to move against the forces that presented in the mediums. So it's our effort against the resistance of the mediums that we're going against. When I talk about mediums, what do I mean? Well, essentially, when we're talking about swimming, we are referring to the resistance from water, air, and gravity. In cycling, we're talking about the resistance we feel from the ground, the air, and gravity. And then lastly, runners. If you think about running, like in cycling, our cells and our bike are the body. We're kind of one unit working together. In a run, it's our runners and us as the runner. And we're going against ground, air, and gravity as well. So I want you to think about what are the sources of resistance do you think you have control over? And I'm going to give you an acronym to help you think about that. And I've included in this presentation, there's a link to the notes from the presentation that I've compiled. So if you're madly scribbling notes, you can refer to that document. It's just in the comments and will be accessible as well. And then also to a PDF of the presentation here, these slides. So if you think about your body and frontal resistance, essentially what we mean is how much surface area we have in the front, because triathlon is a point-to-point process. We're trying to move our body forward from one point to the next point. So the biggest factor of resistance for us is the resistance that the front of our body makes, because that's what we're moving forward. So the narrower our front of the body is, the less resistance we have moving forward, or the lighter our vessel is, the less resistance we have moving forward. So if you think about that and thinking about some common points of resistance, you could think of the acronym CPH. And essentially what that refers to is your clothing choices. So the baggier or heavier your clothing is, the more that's going to create more resistance for you, more frontal area. And the second one is P, which is position on the bike. So the higher up you are, the wider you are on the bike from a frontal perspective, that's going to create greater resistance. And then versus an aero position, maybe or in the drops on a road bike where you're a little bit lower. And the last one is your helmet. So if you've got a really big clunky helmet, that's going to create more resistance versus a more aero or streamlined helmet. That's going to be less resistance. So one of the things that resistance creates is drag. So what scientists refer to this as a drag coefficient. So if you think about it in terms of swimming, biking, running, we have the lowest amount of drag typically in swimming because we're typically alternating from one side to the other when we're swimming freestyle. On the bike, we're moving straight ahead, and our frontal resistance or frontal area is typically pretty static, doesn't change a whole much. And then running, even more so, we're a little bit wider because our arms are out to the side. We've got our legs on the ground, and plus we're weight supported. So we have a greater force of gravity pulling us down as well. So that's why the drag's highest in running. So if you think about this in terms of key points, the greater the frontal area, the greater the drag we're going to experience. And the greater the friction, so the interaction between the surfaces, whether it's water or the ground, the greater force required to overcome that ability to move forward. So just some things to think about when you're thinking about this whole concept of getting faster. So putting these two things together, what we want to think about is it's a combination of two things. One is our technique, so how we make sure that we're as efficient as possible, and then our consistent efforts, so our training that we're doing and our preparation, or that's what I would consider together sweat equity. And then the second part of that equation is the gear that we have. So the more aerodynamic, the better our clothes fit around our body, our wetsuit or swimsuit, whatever you're choosing, a helmet, running shoes, running shorts or tri-shorts or top. All of this is going to play a role in your ability to decrease that amount of resistance that you feel or drag. So that's buying speed. Those are things we have to purchase to participate. Or wear. So that's the gear portion of that equation. All right, let's get into the specifics of swimming. So when we think about swimming, one of the things that's really important here is making sure that we're considering the forces that we have to deal with in swimming. So essentially, what we have to deal with is our bodies, the force of gravity pulling us to the bottom of the pool. There's going to be a lift of buoyancy, so how buoyant our body is, that's going to be lifting us closer to the surface. Then from a front perspective, there's going to be a force of drag that's going to be pulling us backwards in the opposite direction we want to go. So in the opposite direction of the motion we want to move towards. And then we're going to have the propulsive force of us pushing water behind us that's going to move us forward against that drag force. So those are the big four that we want to talk about and think about in swimming. And so I'm going to break it down into three different components that are really important as far as technique are concerned that you can apply into your swimming practice to overcome some of these forces and move easier through the water. All right, so step one, the first point I want to talk about is 3 points of contact for a faster swim. So ideally, when you're swimming in the water, if you see this diagram here, that blue line is the surface of the water. We ideally want to have 3 points of contact with the water. We want to have our heels, our hips, and our head all in contact with the surface of the water. Because what that does is it limits the resistance we feel from the front as we try to move through the water. Another way of looking at this is if your hips are lower than your shoulders, and then your feet are lower than your hips, now your frontal surface area increases, and that makes you slower in the water. So having those 3 points of contact really reduces that drag and allows you to move faster through the water. Point number 2 that I want to emphasize here is, along with this body alignment and those 3 points of contact, this video here shows you a swimmer who is swimming with a very high head position. So for example, as they're going through here, you can see head position is really high, and look how low the hips and the feet sit under the water. So the higher the head, the lower the hips and the feet. So one of the things you can do is keep your head lower in the water, so the back of the water is kind of going over the back of your skull. That will get you in a much better head position and allow your hips and feet to sit higher. So if you swim with your head up like that, or you breathe with your head really high up like that, your hips and your feet are going to sink down, and that will make your frontal surface area or resistance much greater. All right, now let's look at this for, again, another swimmer who's got nice low body position. So, for example, this swimmer here on the left-hand side has got really nice head position here. So you can see as they swim, nice low head position, keeping one goggle in the water. So the bottom goggle stays in the water. That allows the head position to stay really low. So just breathing out of the top of the mouth there, and that will create a much better head position. And as you see this video ending, you'll see that his heels will pop nicely out of the water. So it'll keep him from his hips and his feet from sinking down, having that low head position, and be in a much better, more comfortable position as he's swimming along. So again, keeping one goggle out of the water, your bottom goggle, will help keep the hips higher and the feet higher in the water. The second swimmer here that will show what the swimming does and what the head position does when you're sighting. So initially, when we look at this swimmer here, one of the things you'll see is that this swimmer here will be able to look forward at the same time as the head comes out of the water. So you'll see here, as he takes his first sight, the goggles will come straight up, and then he turns the head to the side to take a breath. And that's a really efficient way to sight when you're in open water. So peeking up and then turning the head to take a breath. So different ways in different environments to manage your head position, whether you're in open water and sighting or just swimming in a pool. So this swimmer, again, on the left here, another example of this low head position and turning the chin to the back to the top shoulder. That's another way to breathe. So instead of thinking about lifting the top of your head or your forehead up to breathe, think about lifting your chin and turning it to your top shoulder as you take a breath, and that will help to keep the head lower as well. So again, some technique tips there. And the other thing you'll see as well is one of the things that's really important when you're breathing in swimming is whenever your face is in the water, as the swimmer on the right is doing, you should be exhaling out the entire time, so blowing bubbles out. What that does is it helps keep the buoyancy of your lungs a little bit lower, So keeping you from those lungs popping up out of the water and allowing your hips and feet to stay closer to the surface. So practicing exhaling the entire time your face is in the water is a really important thing to do. As in between each breath, just think about blowing bubbles out the entire time. All right, now this next track here that's really helpful is our high elbow forearm push. So you'll see on the left side here 3 swimmers, and this is typical of what we see in swimming, that this first swimmer tends to have a low elbow position and then also breaks their wrist. So the wrist ends up being broken like this, at a 90-degree angle, and then they end up just pulling water through with their hand. So it's not a very good position to create leverage on the water. The second swimmer is a little bit better, but more of a straight arm, which it's quite hard to push water back that way, and not the most efficient way to swim and create leverage on the water. The best way is this bent high elbow position. So think about as you're starting your catch and pulling the water through that you're keeping your wrist firm and you just bend at the elbow so the elbow pops up a little bit. It can be below the shoulder. It doesn't have to be right up there. That's hard from a mobility perspective. So if you don't have great shoulder mobility or flexibility, that can be difficult to get it right up by the shoulder. But keeping it just a little bit higher above the forearm, so your forearm ends up being vertical with the water, with the bottom of the pool. That way, you'll get nice leverage on the water, and then your whole forearm to fingertips becomes a paddle, pushing water back. So from the front position here on the right, the top right here, you'll see this from the front view. So again, the key with this is, as you're pulling back, that elbow pops up, wrist stays firm, so your whole forearm to fingertip becomes a paddle. And you notice the swimmer pushes straight back. So her hand isn't coming underneath her body. It's basically coming straight back to pushing the water back to her hip and behind. So the idea here is a cue I use is hands in tracks. So you've got your hands in line with the shoulders and you're just pushing straight back behind you. So these 2 black lines here are showing that. Another little tip is how you hold your hand. So the best way to hold your hand, and they've done studies, science has done studies on this, is not squeezing your hand really hard or cupping it really hard, but rather having it firm, but your fingers relaxed apart slightly. Think like 1/2 centimeter apart is perfect. That creates a nice wide surface area for your hand, and you can push the most water back that way. Okay, so faster swims, some gear and tip concepts here. So goggles, for triathlon, it's always good to have a couple different pairs. It'll allow you to deal with different environmental conditions, and if you take a couple with you, I've seen this happen numerous times at events and in training, that a pair of goggles breaks. So if you have a second pair with you, you're never caught in the loop. So having a clear pair for when it's overcast outside or maybe the visibility isn't great, and a tinted pair. So tinted lenses will help if it's really sunny outside and you're getting a harsh reflection off the surface of the water. So having those 2 pairs is good. A swimsuit, a quality swimsuit, is definitely a must. Optional things are things like a wetsuit or tri-suit. So up here in the middle, that's an example of a wetsuit. On the far right here, there's one of my athletes wearing a tri-suit. So form-fitting, fits next to the skin, so not a lot of frontal drag or resistance there. Other things that are optional are swim skins. So swim skins are like basically like a suit you put over top of what you're going to race in. And it just gives you a little bit more buoyancy, and just a bit of buoyancy, but more of a streamlined perspective as you move through the water. Again, optional things to have, but can help you have, a bit easier time moving through the water. From a training perspective, having a good set of swim fins is helpful, especially when you're doing technique drills and working on your technique. It'll just give you a little bit of extra propulsion. help work on your kick mechanics because it forces your foot to work the right way. And then also it'll help with your ankle flexibility because triathletes are notorious for poor ankle flexibility. So that's something definitely to consider. A front-facing snorkel is really helpful. Again, it's in the front instead of like a traditional like snorkeling snorkel, but rather it faces in the front. So when you're swimming freestyle, it allows you to work on technique drills with your arms without having to worry about breathing. And that will allow you to focus on the drill and what your arm is doing. Because I find that a lot of athletes, once they start to breathe, they lose the focus on the drill. So front-facing snorkel can be helpful. Nose plug, sometimes if people are not accustomed to using snorkels, can be a good, helpful thing. And a pull buoy, again, if you're working on doing some drills with your upper body, like sculling or anything where you want to have more of an upper body focus and take your legs out of the equation, that can be helpful. With the wetsuit, tri-suit, swim skin, you want to be able to try before you buy. The fins, same thing. Just that'll allow you to make sure that things fit well. A lot of companies will allow you to try them in pools just to make sure they work okay. Tri-suit companies typically have samples that you can try so you get the right size before you order. Wetsuit and swim skin will also give you more flexibility of the type of events you can do. Wetsuit specifically, if it's a cooler temperature, like if it starts getting, around the 20 degree mark, then you're kind of on the line of it being a wetsuit mandatory type of swim. So, you get 20 degrees, 19, 18, then a lot of events will say you got to wear a wetsuit. So depending on the event you're doing and the conditions you're in, you might need to have a wetsuit to actually participate in the event. So just keep that in mind. And then lastly, don't forget about chamois cream or some sort of lube like body butter or body glide, something like that, because chafing really sucks. So especially when you're wearing a wetsuit, the motion of your head can create rubbing around the neck. Anywhere where there can be friction on the body, the chest, the forearms, around the calves, those type of things are areas that are good to put that chamois butter on wherever you can, because chafing is not fun. All right, so just some gear and tip suggestions. Practice. So this specifically refers to swim in groups whenever you can, because triathlons, when you're in there, you have to swim in groups. You have to get used to the contact and having to navigate around people and the choppy water and all those type of things. So the more you can swim in groups, the more comfortable that transition will be when you actually have to swim in an event. You always want to warm up. So always get people to do these little sink downs, just like this guy's doing here. So, in open water, or even in the swimming pool, if you find you have trouble breathing, it's just a good, even if you don't have trouble breathing, but it's just a good orientation to the water before you start swimming. So I get people to take a nice big breath in with their head out of the water, then submerge their whole body under the water and exhale out as long as they can underneath. And then repeat that 5 or 6 times. So it just allows you to get comfortable in the water, get comfortable with that long, slow exhale, which will help you keep relaxed. And that'll be a great tool for you as you start your warm-up. Always want to warm up. A lot of the medical emergencies in triathlon happen in the water, and it's usually because people do not warm up properly. So in any event or any practice session, take time to warm up properly. I can't emphasize that enough from a safety perspective. Practice sighting. So I talked about sighting a few slides ago, but that idea of getting used to sighting in open water, because you're going to need to navigate courses, looking at buoys, swimming in a certain direction. And the straighter you can swim, the faster you'll be, and the less distance you'll have to cover in the swim, which saves you energy for the bike and the run. Joining a tri-swim group or a master swim group where you get specific coaching and someone can look at your stroke is super helpful, because you may think you're doing things properly, but having a set a professional's eyes on you. I coach the Regina Multisport group in town here, And having those little bits of feedback to focus on during your sets is super helpful and can really help improve your swimming over time. And really get used to sharing that space and contact with other swimmers. It can be super helpful. And lastly, from a training perspective, you want to think about swimming the distance required for your event plus 10%. So, if I'm doing a sprint distance event, I might do, be comfortable swimming, 900 meters or 1,000 meters straight, so that I'm really comfortable with the distance that I have, plus a little bit more. And then practice drafting. And drafting is this concept, it's totally legal in the swim, of being either directly behind someone, so you could be like a meter behind someone. Within a meter is kind of the ideal place to be, like right behind their feet swimming. You can save 20 or 30% of your energy back there because there's much less drag. So you're allowing the person in front of you to do a lot of the work, which helps you in the bike and the run. The other way to draft is what's called lateral drafting. And this is where you'll be swimming about a meter offset somebody, and your hand will come up in line with their shoulder. And again, you can still get quite a good drag benefit there, reduction in about 20%. So another nice place to practice. So if you have a buddy or somebody, a group, you could practice these positions as you're swimming in like sets of 25s or 50s. Just go in, practice right behind each other in that 1 meter position. Or if you're sharing a lane, you can do some offset drag or offset drafting as well. Those are great things to practice. And then, practice your transitions from swim to bike. So, if you're nearby a pool, you can, do your swim and then quickly transition and go do a bike ride, whether it's indoors or outdoors, just to get used to that feeling, because there is a big change between your blood flow when you're swimming, which is mostly upper body, and then you got to change it to bike, which is mostly lower body. So there's got to be a blood flow change. And that's why you typically feel a little bit heavy, maybe a little breathless as you get through that swim section to the bike. So practicing it will just help you feel more comfortable once you are into the event. All right, let's talk about the bike. So faster bike, some technique and gear considerations. There's two things that we'll focus on here. Technique and tips to master easy and moderate effort before all else. So getting yourself in a place where your endurance, your ability to sustain a steady effort for a long period of time, is in a really good place, so that when you start to do some interval work, your body's ready to absorb that type of work. And then the second thing we'll talk about is prioritizing your gear choices. So first thing is about effort. And I talked about this in the last presentation in a little more detail, and you can refer back to that. But essentially, we work in this 5-zone effort level. So primarily what we want to do as athletes is we want to spend, when we're first training for our event, most of our time should be spent in this green zone. So the zones 1 and 2, this easy and moderate effort. So you're able to talk comfortably, or even in broken sentences. You feel comfortable and steady for the entire session. You can eat and drink comfortably at that effort. And that's where we want to really develop our fitness first before we move into zones 3, 4, 5. So the yellow and red zones. And the idea here is you want to learn how to pedal and sustain this easy and moderate effort over your planned distance before adding red zone intervals. So, if you're doing a sprint distance race and you've only been biking 5K, jumping into intervals right away probably isn't the best way to train your body. Build your endurance first at these easy and moderate efforts up to your race event distance, and then you can start to add intervals in small doses to help to better round out your fitness. A great rule for any type of training that you're doing, whether it's swim, bike, or run, is always finish your training sessions feeling like you could do a little bit more. No matter if you're doing an easier session or you're doing a harder interval session, always finish feeling like you could do a little bit more, another set or two. This will allow you to not overdo it during the sessions, allow you to maintain quality of form and technique, and also save that over the top effort for your race. You don't want to spend it in training. So that's an important thing to consider. And lastly, heart rate and power can be useful tools to master effort, but you want to master effort first. Understand how your body feels at the different effort levels, get comfortable with that, and then you can start looking at heart rate and power as other tools to help manage the intensity. So some things from a technique perspective to focus on when you're biking. There's 3 things when I'm thinking about cycling. One of the things is kick the ball. So when you're at the top of your pedal stroke, just as this rider is here, you're thinking about kicking your foot right over the top. And then this will allow you to bring your foot through quicker. And I think about just at the tail end of that kick, stomping down to the bottom. So it's kick and stomp. So that's a nice way to think about that cue. And then the next one is scrape mud off the bottom of your shoes. So when the pedal's at the bottom, you think about doing that same motion you would if you had a big clump of mud on your foot and you had to scrape it off. So you're just scraping it off to pull your foot through the bottom of that pedal stroke and maintain your pressure on the pedal to maintain your power and speed. And the last one is as your foot's coming up the back of the pedal stroke, so you're lifting it or it's coming through from the bottom back up to the top where you kick and stomp again, you're kind of thinking about just unweighting the foot. Rather than like wasting all this energy trying to pull up hard, just think about unweighting the pedal and then going back through those 3 cues again. And that will allow you to have a nice smooth circle when you are cycling. Now, here's some techniques to practice that, or some drills that you can do while you're riding. So one of them is a slow cadence or low cadence drill. So you're climbing at like 40, 50 RPM. So that's revolutions per minute. And this will help identify any dead spots in your pedaling technique. So the key here is you want to be in a big gear. So big chainring on the front, towards that smallest cog on the back of your chain set or your gear set. And essentially you're just riding and lots of tension on the chain, but low cadence, because that tension's there, it's going to help you identify, are there any spots where I'm not putting pressure on the pedals, where I'm, maybe losing some power, and then you can help to correct that over time. Another way to do this is on the opposite end of the cadence spectrum is high cadence spin ups. So this is where you're spinning up from about 90, you start at 90 revolutions per minute, and then to the point where you start to bounce in the saddle. And what you're trying to pay attention to is, how can I keep this as smooth as possible at the highest cadence possible so I'm not bouncing around? And the key again is you want to limit, in both of these drills, you want to limit any upper body movement. That becomes really important. You don't want to waste energy rocking your body back and forth. Keep your body as still and as relaxed as you can, that upper body, so that all the work and energy gets transferred to the legs. Practice set you can do with each of these drills. You can start with 30-second intervals with 30 seconds to a minute easy effort between each. Again, you don't want to go so hard on these ones. Think of that kind of more of a moderate effort as you go through these. And then for the length of time of the interval sets, you can start with 5 minutes, just doing 5 minutes of the 30 and 30 or 30 and 1 minute, and then work up to 20 minutes where you're doing that steady and comfortable of a total time for your interval set. And again, with this idea of always finishing like you can do a little bit more, that will always set you up to be able to train consistently over time. Now, shifting gears is always something to pay attention to and consider, and how you do that. It's definitely a skill set. So first thing you want to consider is understanding your cadence. So learn to ride a gearing that allows you to maintain your maximum speed while at an easy and moderate effort on various types of terrain, like flat versus uphill versus standing up. So try to pay attention to what gearing allows me to maintain that steady to moderate effort at the maximum speed possible, staying in that easy to moderate effort. Then take note of your cadence that you normally ride at to maintain that easy and moderate effort in that particular gearing. Is it, most triathletes kind of fall between the 75 to 95 revolutions per minute across different terrains, so that's pretty common. But you'll find a cadence that works best for you. There's no specific number that's ideal for you specifically. You'll find a cadence range that works well for you. But working in different ranges from the low cadence set we did or the high cadence set helps you to get comfortable in a wider cadence range. The last thing I want to talk about is just how you ride and the gear choices you make. So one of the things you want to avoid is what's called cross-chain gearing. So having your chain at an angle, so the thinner black or the thicker black lines at the right side here is like your front chain ring, and then this is your rear cassette at the back or the left side. So what you don't want is to have cross-chain set up. So that's where you'd have it in your smallest cog on the front, smallest chain ring on the front, and then your smallest cassette on the back. So then your chain's at an angle. You want to avoid those steep angles as much as possible because it's not efficient, and you actually can lose power or speed by trying to ride like that. And the other extreme is if you got the big chain ring on the front and then your biggest chain ring on the back or cog on the back. Again, your chain will be at a steep angle and not a very efficient way to ride. So it's better to switch your front chain ring in order to make that line a little bit straighter on the chain so that you have a better transfer of your power to the chain. Now let's talk about faster bike in terms of your position and comfort. One of the best investments you can make is to get a professional bike fit. So if you've never had this done before, I'm telling you right now, it's super important. It'll make sure that you're comfortable on the bike and in a position that maximizes your position in terms of aerodynamics, but also in terms of power production, so putting power to the pedals. So again, getting a bike fit from a certified professional is really great investment. A Retool bike fit, there's a shop, Zone Performance in Saskatoon and Dutch Cycle in Regina. There's other bike fitters in town as well that you can go to, but I would strongly suggest, again, get a professional bike fit. It'll make a world of difference to your comfort and enjoyment on the bike. Secondly, when we talk about position and comfort, you want to learn to ride in different positions on the bike. So for example, in a road bike, you typically, most people ride up on the hoods of the bike. So where your brakes are attached, they'll have their hands there. You can get used to riding in that position or in your hands in the drops, which is typically a more aerodynamic position on a road bike. You want to get comfortable in both those positions, specifically the aero position, because aero positions allow you to create less drag because you're in a more aerodynamic position, which allows you to go faster. And in a tri bike, obviously your aero bars, where you're resting your elbows on, will be most efficient and aerodynamic there. So getting used to riding in those positions all through the season can be really helpful in maximizing your comfort on the bike. The other thing you want to practice is drinking from your water bottle on your bike. I see this all the time that, say in the wintertime, people are riding on their bike and then they go outside to ride and they find it difficult. They're just not comfortable with drinking on the bike, or they do it more infrequently because they're not comfortable grabbing their bike or grabbing their water bottle and then taking a drink from it because they got to take a hand off the handlebars and so on. It's really important to practice this, and even when you're indoors on a trainer, you can still practice the technique. So making sure your eyes are forward and reaching down, grabbing the bottle and taking a drink, and doing it with both hands. So you get used to grabbing it and taking a drink from both hands. It's a great way just to make sure you're comfortable with that technique, especially as you transfer outside. And then lastly, this is more of a effort monitor, but learn to take big, deep breaths when you're cycling easy to moderate effort. And this will help manage your effort, because if you can't take big, deep inhales and exhales, this usually means that you're not riding at an easy and moderate pace. If it's hard for you to do that, you're typically riding at a moderate, hard, or harder pace. So it allows you to gauge your effort, make sure that if you're truly trying to ride easier or moderate, being able to take big, deep breaths, big inhale through the nose, big exhale through the mouth consistently will allow you to ensure that you're in that easy to moderate zone. Intensity too. So some gear priorities here. Helmet, obviously, you need to have it. It has to be fit properly. It needs to be ANSI or Snell approved. So that's from a safety perspective. If you don't have that approval, you can't wear it in an event. Check for cracks, deformities, broken or ripped straps if you haven't worn your helmet in a while, and please replace them before you use them. Invest in a good helmet. It's really essential for your safety. And also, if it's a more aerodynamic helmet, it can save you time as well. So a little tidbit there. More so than even a fancy carbon frame or wheels or anything else. Operational bike, that's a big one. So make sure, before you're heading outside, you get a tune-up, or you haven't used your bike in a while, get a tune-up. The bike fit I talked about. Bottle cages so you can hold your hydration. Bike shoes, cleats, and pedals. So there's different types of cycling shoes that you can use. They're not essential. You don't have to use cycling shoes, but definitely if you just have a pedal where you put your running shoe on top, you can race in that. There's nothing saying you can't. Or even with the toe clip that you slide your foot into on the pedal. Those are okay. But the issue with those is when you're riding in running shoes have a soft and flexible bottom. So that's where you lose a lot of your power transfer on the bottom. And plus you can't pull through on the bottom. So you don't get that extra connection with the pedal, and it decreases your power output. So ideally with bike shoes, they clip you right to the pedal, which makes for a better power transfer all the way through. And they have a stiff bottom on the bottom of the shoe, which are plastic or carbon, which allows a better transfer of power between your foot and the pedal, and also dissipates the force across your foot rather than being in a running shoe where all of it goes up into your arch and can create some foot problems too. So definitely, for the few $100s you have to spend, getting a good set of bike shoes with cleats can be a good investment in your power and allow you to have a better experience on the bike. Now, there's different types of bike shoes, like bike shoes, cycling shoes. Traditionally, they're intended to lock you into your foot into the shoe. So they have usually less adjustments and are a little bit more challenging to put on. Whereas a triathlon specific cycling shoe usually has one strap that you just have to undo, slide your foot in, and then do the strap back up. So a little bit faster for getting in and out of the shoe. So that's the main difference between those two. You can see these athletes up here. They have these tri shoes. So the woman on the left here, the one strap across, that's a tri cycling shoe. That's an example of it. Okay, so bike tri shorts, these are essential. They have a little chamois pad in the crotch area, so just a little extra padding. They're so worth the investment in those, a good pair of cycling shorts or tri shorts, just to allow for, I like to have both if you can, allow for a little extra comfort. Allows you to take care down there and make sure that the cycling is as comfortable as possible. Chamois cream again, so that lubrication, just putting in, anywhere where there's friction between the seat and your crotch or groin area. Definitely want to use the lubrication for that. Just prevents chafing. And then from a training perspective, having an indoor trainer, so a smart or fluid trainer or a magnetic trainer, allows you the convenience of biking at home. So to attach your bike to that system and allows you to spin stationary on your own bike. It's easier to stay consistent with your riding in the winter months, or if there's a really crappy day weather-wise in the summer, you can pop your bike on there and still get your training done. And there's many great indoor cycling groups to join. I know I run virtual cycling sessions every week, which are great for allowing you to stay motivated and accountable to your training. For gear, any sort of triathlon gear, cycling gear, and tech stuff, whether it's watches or trainers or whatever, check out DC Rainmaker here for excellent gear and tech reviews. He does really thorough reviews, super helpful. So if you're looking at purchasing anything, he reviews tons of different brands, and it's a really helpful resource. All right. Let's talk running. So for a faster run, here are some of the technique and gear considerations. Same as bike, we want to master easy and moderate efforts before all else. And then we'll talk about prioritizing your gear choices. All right, so same thing here. You want to master easy and moderate effort. So the green zone first at your specific race distance before doing any sort of work in zones 3, 4, 5 effort. So we're doing those harder interval sessions. Get comfortable here at your race distances, and then you can start to add the interval work. That will just set you up well, especially in running, to build durability and resiliency in your body and decrease the risk of injury. You want to finish your training sessions always feeling like you can do a little bit more. That's always a great policy to follow. And then, as I said, with cycling, heart rate and power can be used for running as useful tools. But again, work on mastering effort first, and then you can always add those tools later on. A couple technique cues that are helpful. This is actually in 4 easy steps, not 3, but you want to think about running tall. So I always say run tall, meaning keep as much space as you can between your ribs and your hips. So nice long spine, nice tall posture when you're running. That gives more space for your organs to function rather than being slumped over and compressed through the spine. The other one is chest up, chin back. So lifting your chest up away from those hips and your chin back, so you have good alignment between the ears over top of the shoulders. And the last thing is on that point is always think about your eyes looking forward to the horizon. One of the things that can happen as you get tired as a triathlete is you start to look down at your feet, and as soon as your head moves forward and in front of the shoulders, it's going to pull your posture forward, and then your hips and your legs don't function as well and as efficiently underneath. So always think about keeping good posture, chest up, chin back. Number 3, thumbs scrape the bottom of the ribs. So have your elbows bent about 90 degrees, and then your thumb should just scrape the bottom of your ribs or go just past the bottom of your ribs as you're swinging your arms. That's always a good technique cue to make sure that your arms are in a good position. And then another little trick with that as well is if you want to speed up your legs, speed up your arm cadence first. So the faster your arms go, your legs will follow that. So it's a good way if you need to pick up your speed in a short period. Quick arms, quick feet. And lastly, feet land under the hips. So when you're striding, you want your contact with the ground to primarily happen when your legs or your foot is underneath your hips. So that prevents you from overstriding, striding too much on your heels, decreases the stress that your leg feels on impact, and then also limits the time your foot is on the ground. So limits your ground contact time. So a little drill you can do is you can figure out what your normal running cadence is. So for example, I might look at how many times one foot hits the ground in 10 seconds, and I'll multiply that by 6. So say my foot hits the ground 7 times in 10 seconds. Okay, so I multiply that by 6, and then I got 43 strides. and both legs together. Okay, so I take about 86 strides per minute. So that's something to think about there. Okay, so what we want to do is, most people, between the two legs, they'll usually stride anywhere between usually 70 anywhere between 70 and 90 strides per minute on one leg, or 100 and 150, 140, 150 to 180 strides or 90 strides per minute. So what we want to do is try to increase your cadence a little bit if you're on the lower end of that range. So think about just practicing increasing your cadence like 5 per minute. So that's a little drill you can do is, okay, can I run at a slightly faster cadence? Even that, if that shortens your stride, that's okay, because it'll decrease your ground contact time and allow you to run a little bit faster. So a little run form practice session you could do is start with 30-second or 1-minute intervals, where you're just trying to increase your cadence a little bit faster for that minute or 30 seconds. And then you'll just go back to your normal effort running for 1 to 2 minutes between, just so you get a feel of, okay, running a little bit of a faster cadence, so that get used to that over short periods of time, and then slowly but surely that faster cadence will become normal for you. You can begin with a total of 5-minute efforts and work up to 20 minutes to finish. But again, always finish feeling like you can do a little bit more. All right, some gear essentials for running. Tri shorts, run tops. So these gals here are all wearing tri shorts. Most of them are wearing tri tops here with the Endurance Journey ones. Again, fits form to the body, decreasing that resistance. Those are great to have from an aerodynamics perspective. You could wear run shorts and a normal run top. That's fine too. But if you're looking for aerodynamics, the closer the gear you have that fits to the body, the more aerodynamic it's going to be, and the less drag and resistance you're going to feel when you're running. If you have a tri suit, that saves time, because that's something you can wear in the water and on the bike and on the run. You could also just have a cycling top that you put on after the swim, and tri shorts too. That's a good combination to have, so you can transfer into that after the swim and then be able to wear that on the run. Or you just have a separate run top. All of those are options. Comfortable running shoes that you're used to running in, with socks, a good pair of socks that are form-fitting to the foot so they don't bunch up and cause blisters. Speed laces. So these are laces that you put into your shoe that are like bungee. They're elastic, so they allow you to have them preset and tied up, and then you can just slip your foot on, so you don't have, or slip your foot into your shoe so you don't have to tie up your laces. Super helpful there. Makes transition from bike to run much easier. Having a good hat just for sun coverage, especially if it's hot outside, that can be helpful, keeping sun off your head. And also you can put ice into it and keep yourself cool if you need to. Chamois cream again, so that lubrication, skin lubrication, to put around any points where you might have chafing of your skin, like around your armpits, chest, groin area are common places, because chafing sucks in all areas. So the more you can prevent it, the better. And then practicing bike run sessions, so what are called brick sessions in triathlon throughout the year. I have a lot of my athletes practice them. It just helps with creating your understanding and getting you more efficient at that transition from bike to run. It's a very unique feeling that you have when you go from biking to running. So the more you get used to that in your training throughout the year, the easier it will be. And you can do them in short sessions, like literally hop off your bike ride and just run for 5 minutes, just at a nice, easy, comfortable pace, just to get used to that motion, thinking about those run tips we just talked about. And then as you get closer to your event, you can start to expand that time out that you run. That will allow you to get better prepared for your event. All right, so as a review, we covered the forces that you got to deal with and overcome as part of you as a body, and the medium that creates the resistance that you have to overpower. and overcome when you're doing your swim, bike, and run. Then we talked about swimming, biking, running in terms of your technique, your gear, and also your effort levels. And I gave you some specific drills that you can work on as far as technique's concerned, some form things you can think about, and some gear that's important for you to consider when you're preparing for your triathlon. So thank you so much. Just below on the left-hand side, there's a couple resources that are great books if you want to get into this and nerd out a little bit more into these topics. Faster by Jim Gorley and Triathlon Science by Jim Vance and Joe Friel are excellent books where you can really get into some of these concepts that we talked about today. I could literally spend a few weeks on this topic, but obviously we wanted to keep it within an hour. If you need some help, you can contact me via email at patrick@endurancejourney.com, Endurance Journey on Instagram, Endurance Journey on Facebook, and then on our website at endurancejourney.com. So thanks so much today. We are helping out new clients or new athletes anytime. So if you're looking for support with your own training or need some assistance there, please reach out and we'd be happy to help you out. So thank you so much for your time, and we will see you at our next presentation in March.